I hadn't thought about Noah in months. Not in any real way. Not the kind that hits your chest or steals your breath. He'd faded into that quiet mental drawer labeled before dash, filed away under old apartments, deleted numbers, and versions of myself I barely recognized anymore. So when I saw him standing across the street outside the coffee shop, my first thought was that my brain was being cruel. He was leaning against a parking meter, phone in his hand, looking mildly annoyed in the way he always did when he was waiting on someone. Same posture, same unconscious frown, different jacket, different hair, but unmistakably him. I stopped walking without realizing it. People brushed past me, irritated murmurs snapping me back just enough to step aside. I told myself not to stare. I told myself to keep moving. I'd done the work. I'd healed. I'd dated other men, built a routine, learned how to be alone without it feeling like punishment. But my body hadn't gotten the memo. Noah looked up, scanning the street, and then his eyes landed on me. The second stretched thin, brittle. His expression shifted through surprise, disbelief, and something softer I couldn't name. "Lucas," he said, already stepping forward. Hearing my name in his voice felt like reopening a scar just to check if it still hurt. It did. "Hey," I replied too casually. My hands were already in my pockets, grounding myself. "Didn't know you were back in town." "Yeah. Last week." He smiled, tentative. "Didn't expect to run into you like this." Neither had I. I'd imagined this moment once, years ago, dramatic, emotional, closure-heavy. Instead, it was a Tuesday afternoon with burnt coffee smells and traffic noise filling the gaps between us. We stood there, both clearly unsure what came next. He looked older. Not worse. Just lived in. Like someone who'd made choices and carried them. "So," he said finally, nodding toward the Sylvia behind me. You got time?" I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to. Because I wanted it too much. "Yeah," I said. "I do." Inside, we ordered like strangers who knew each other's favorite drinks anyway. That familiarity stung more than distance ever had. We took a small table by the window, knees not quite touching. "I heard about your dad," I said quietly. "I'm sorry." His shoulders dropped a fraction. "Thanks. That means more than you know." Silence settled again, heavier now, but not hostile. "Just careful." "I thought about reaching out," he admitted. "A lot. I just didn't know if I had the right." I nodded. "I didn't know what I'd say if you did." That was the truth. The simpler truth was this. Seeing him didn't undo my progress, but it did remind me why it had taken so much effort to begin with. We talked for another half hour. About work. About the city. About nothing that mattered and everything that once had. And when we finally stood to leave, there was no hug. Just a shared pause. "Maybe," he said, soft, "we could talk again." "Maybe," I echoed. Walking away, my chest felt tight but steady. Like something old had stirred, not to reclaim space, but to ask a question I wasn't ready to answer yet. And for the first time, I didn't rush to shut it down. I told myself the encounter was a fluke. Wrong place, wrong time, old ghosts stirred up by caffeine and nostalgia. That night, I went home, cooked pasta, watched half an episode of something forgettable, and went to bed telling myself I didn't need to unpack any of it yet. That lasted until the next morning. There was a message waiting on my phone. "Noah." Just my name, followed by a question mark. Like he was knocking on a door he wasn't sure he was allowed to open. I stared at it longer than I should have. Then I typed back, "Hey." Nothing else. No warmth, no distance. Just honesty in its smallest form. We didn't jump straight into anything heavy. At first it was logistics. He was back for good. New job. Same city, different neighborhood. I told him about my place, my work, the things that had filled the years since him. We danced around the past like it might crack open if we looked at it too hard. A few days later, he asked if I wanted to walk. Not coffee, not drinks. Just a walk. It felt deliberate. Neutral ground. We met by the river, late afternoon. The water moved slow and brown, reflecting a sky that couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Noah stood there with his hands in his jacket pockets, rocking slightly on his heels like he was bracing himself. "You look good," he said. "So do you," I replied. It didn't feel loaded. Just true. We walked side by side, close enough to feel each other's presence, far enough to keep the air between us clear. The conversation came easier this time. Less polite. More real. "I used to think about you every time I came back here," he admitted suddenly. Like the city would remind me on purpose. I didn't answer right away. The river filled the space. I tried not to, I said finally. But yeah, same. There it was. Not an accusation, not a confession, just shared ground. We stopped at a railing overlooking the water. Noah leaned forward, elbows resting on the cold metal. I know I messed things up, he said quietly. I didn't know how to be honest back then. With you. Or myself. I watched the water instead of him. We both did things we didn't understand yet. He nodded. I don't expect anything. I just didn't want to pretend you didn't matter. That hit harder than any apology could have. For years, what hurt most wasn't the breakup, it was the silence afterward. The way it made everything feel disposable. When we finally parted, there was still no hug. Just a long look. The kind that acknowledges history without demanding a future. Walking home alone, I realized something had shifted not toward him, but inside me. I wasn't reliving the past. I was standing next to it, fully aware of where I was now. That night, I lay awake longer than usual. Not restless, just thoughtful. I didn't know what Noah and I were becoming, friends, something else, or just two people who needed to finish a conversation years late. But for the first time, the question didn't scare me. It felt open, like a door I could choose to walk through. Or not. A week passed before I saw Noah again. Not accidentally this time. This one was intentional, which somehow made it more unsettling. We agreed to meet for dinner, nothing fancy, just a quiet place neither of us had history with. Neutral territory felt important, like we were trying not to contaminate the present with the past. I got there early. Old habit. I sat with my back to the wall, watching the door, pretending my pulse wasn't picking up every time it opened. When Noah walked in, I recognized the way my body reacted before my brain caught up. Not longing, not pain, just awareness. Hey, he said, sliding into the chair across from me. Hey. We smiled. Real ones this time. Dinner was easy in a way that surprised me. We talked about food, about how the city had changed, about dumb work stories. He laughed more than he used to. I noticed that. I also noticed how he listened, really listened, like he wasn't waiting for his turn to speak anymore. At some point, between the second glass of wine and dessert we didn't order, the conversation shifted. It wasn't dramatic, just inevitable. I wasn't ready back then, he said quietly. I thought loving you meant losing myself. I nodded slowly. And I thought loving you meant waiting. Forever, if I had to. He winced, not defensively, just honestly. I hate that I put you in that position. I let myself stay there, I replied. Not to absolve him. To free myself. The words didn't hurt like they once would have. They felt factual, like stating the weather. We walked outside together after, the night air cool and grounding. The street was calm, lit by amber streetlights that softened everything they touched. We stopped at the corner where we'd go separate ways. Noah hesitated. I don't want to rewrite history, he said. But I do want to know who you are now. I considered that. The man I'd become. The man standing here, not reaching, not retreating. I'm still figuring that out, I said. But I like who I am more than I used to. He smiled at that. Not proud. Respectful. We didn't touch. We didn't promise anything. He walked away first this time, and I watched him go, not with ache, but with clarity. Later, alone in my apartment, I realized something subtle had settled into place. I wasn't measuring the present against what we'd lost anymore. I was letting it exist on its own terms. Seeing Noah again hadn't reopened a wound. It had shown me where the scar was and how fully it had healed. Whatever came next wouldn't be about fixing the past. It would be about choosing the present, deliberately, without fear. And for the first time, that choice felt entirely mine. I didn't expect Noah to become part of my routine. That was the line I kept repeating to myself, like a boundary drawn in pencil. But routines don't announce themselves. They just happen quietly, persistently, until one day you notice someone's absence would feel strange. We started texting more. Not constantly. Thoughtfully. He'd send a photo of a bookstore he'd stumbled into, or a sarcastic comment about the city council's latest attempt to revitalize something no one had asked to be fixed. I'd reply with dry humor, with pieces of my life I no longer guarded out of habit. There was something different in the way he showed up now. Less defensive, less performative, like he wasn't trying to be the man I remembered or the man he thought I wanted. One evening, after a long workday that left me hollowed out in that specific adult way, he asked if I wanted company. Not distraction. Not escape. Company. I said yes before I could overthink it. We met at my place. That felt intentional too. A small risk. He stood in my doorway, hands full with a cheap bottle of wine and takeout containers, looking around like he was cataloging a version of me he'd never known. "This feels very you," he said, glancing at my shelves, the plants by the window, the quiet order I'd built. "It is," I replied. "I worked hard for it." We ate on the couch, knees angled toward each other, conversation flowing in that low, comfortable register that only happens when no one's trying to impress anymore. At one point, he really laughed and leaned back, eyes closed, like he felt safe enough to let go. That was the moment I noticed it. Not attraction, not nostalgia, trust. Later, when the food was gone and the wine mostly untouched, silence settled in. Not awkward, just present. "I don't want to mess this up," he said finally, staring at his hands. I considered the weight of that sentence. "Then don't rush to name it." He looked up, surprised, then nodded. "Okay." When he left, there was a pause at the door. No expectation, no tension pulling us forward or back, just the shared acknowledgement of restraint. After he was gone, I stood alone in my living room, listening to the city hum outside. My chest felt full but not crowded, like I'd made space instead of surrendering it. I realized something then, something small but solid. The past hadn't returned to claim me. It had come back to ask if it still belonged here. And for the first time, I didn't feel pressured to answer. I turned off the lights, washed the dishes, and got ready for bed. Ordinary things, grounding things. As I lay there in the dark, my thoughts weren't racing ahead or spiraling backward. They were exactly where I was. And that felt like progress. The next time I saw Noah, it was raining. Not the dramatic kind, just enough to darken the pavement and make the city feel smaller. He texted asking if I wanted to grab groceries together. It was such an ordinary request that it caught me off guard. "Sure," I replied, staring at the word longer than necessary. Ordinary used to scare me. Now it felt earned. We met outside the store, both underdressed for the weather. He handed me an extra umbrella without comment, like he'd planned for me specifically. I noticed things like that more now, not as proof of anything, just as information. Inside, we moved through aisles with the ease of people who knew how to share space. No urgency, no performative distance. He asked my opinion on pasta sauces. I teased him about buying name-brand cereal. At one point, our hands brushed reaching for the same carton of eggs, and neither of us pulled away immediately. It wasn't electric. It was steady. Back at my place, rain streaked the windows while we unpacked groceries. Music played softly from my speaker, something instrumental, unassuming. He stood at the counter chopping vegetables, sleeves rolled up, completely at ease in a room that used to belong to a version of me shaped by his absence. "You know," he said, not looking up, "I used to think love was supposed to feel like pressure. Like if it wasn't hard, it wasn't real." I leaned against the counter. "I thought that too. Turns out, hard just means unsustainable." He smiled at that, thoughtful. "Yeah, I'm starting to learn the difference." We cooked together slowly, shared small tasks. When we sat down to eat, the conversation drifted past memories resurfacing, but differently now. Not sharp, not heavy, just acknowledged. "I don't miss who I was back then," I admitted quietly. "But I don't hate him anymore either." Noah met my eyes. "I'm glad." After dinner, we stood by the window watching the rain ease into mist. The city hummed on, indifferent and comforting. He shifted closer, not touching, just present. I felt the warmth of him beside me and realized I wasn't bracing for loss anymore. "I don't know what this becomes," he said softly. I nodded. "We don't have to decide tonight." He exhaled, like he'd been holding that breath for years. When he left later, there was still no kiss. No grand gesture. Just a quiet understanding that something real doesn't need to rush to prove itself. Alone again, I cleaned the kitchen, moved through my space with a calm I hadn't known before. The past hadn't disappeared, but it no longer dictated the terms. Lying in bed, listening to the rain fade, I felt a realization settle, not loud, not final, but clear. Whatever Noah and I were rebuilding wasn't about fixing what broke. It was about seeing each other clearly, now, and choosing without fear to stay present. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. Things changed after that, not suddenly, but unmistakably. Noah stopped feeling like a visitor in my life, and more like someone moving at the same pace beside me. We didn't label it. We didn't need to. The absence of urgency became its own kind of intimacy. One Saturday morning, he showed up with coffee and no plan. That alone felt new. We sat on the floor by the window, backs against the couch, watching the city wake up. He talked about his job, how it challenged him, how he finally felt settled instead of restless. I told him about a promotion I'd quietly accepted weeks ago and never mentioned, partly because it hadn't felt complete until I said it out loud. "I'm proud of you," he said, without hesitation. The words landed easily. No old tension, no buried regret. Later, we walked through my neighborhood, hands close but not touching, like we were both aware of the space and respecting it. He asked questions, not just polite ones, but curious ones, about what I wanted next, about what scared me now. The difference was that he listened without trying to solve anything. It was in the park, sitting on a low stone wall, that the past finally showed its face again. Not dramatically, just honestly. "I was afraid," he said, staring at the ground between his shoes, "of committing to something I couldn't control, of being seen too clearly." I nodded. "I was afraid of being abandoned if I asked for more." We let that sit between us, not as blame, as context. "I don't feel that way anymore," he added. "About you, or about myself." I looked at him, then really looked, and saw someone grounded in a way he never was before. Not perfect, just present. "I don't either," I said. That was when he reached for my hand. Slowly, deliberately, giving me time to pull away if I needed to. I didn't. His hand was warm, steady, familiar without being overwhelming. It wasn't fireworks. It was alignment. We stayed there for a while, fingers loosely intertwined, watching dogs chase each other across the grass and strangers live their separate lives. The world didn't pause for us, and somehow that made the moment better. Later, when we parted, there was finally a hug. Brief, grounded, no desperation clinging to it, just reassurance. That night, alone again, I thought about how different this felt from before. Not because Noah had changed, though he had, but because I had. I knew my boundaries now. I knew my worth. And I knew that choosing someone didn't mean losing myself. As I got into bed, the city quiet outside my window, a realization settled in gently. This wasn't a second chance at the same story. It was a new one, written by two people who had finally learned how to stay. And whatever came next, I was ready to meet it without fear. What surprised me most wasn't that Noah stayed, it was how normal that became. Weeks passed, and our lives began to overlap in small, unremarkable ways. Grocery lists shared. Inside jokes formed quietly. His jacket hanging on the back of my chair without ceremony. None of it felt like a claim. It felt like consent. One night, after a long day that left me brittle and quiet, I snapped at him over something stupid. A misread text. A missed call. The kind of thing that used to spiral us into silence years ago. This time, he didn't retreat. "Hey," he said, calm but firm. "Talk to me." I hated how much that disarmed me. "I'm tired," I admitted. "And scared. And I don't want to pretend I'm not." He nodded. "Then don't." We sat on opposite ends of the couch, space between us earned, not enforced. The tension eased not because it vanished, but because it had somewhere to go. Later that week, I went with him to a small work thing. Nothing fancy, just drinks with coworkers. I watched him navigate conversations with ease, grounded in himself. Someone introduced me as Noah's partner, then immediately apologized, flustered. Noah didn't correct them. He didn't confirm it either. He just looked at me, checking. I smiled. A small one. "Enough." On the walk home, he asked, "Was that okay?" "Yeah," I said. It didn't feel like pressure. Just possibility. He reached for my hand again, familiar now, and this time it felt like continuity instead of caution. That night, lying beside him, we didn't rush intimacy. We talked. About boundaries. About how we'd hurt each other before. About what staying would require now. The honesty was exhausting and clarifying. "I can't promise I won't ever get scared," he said quietly. "I don't need promises," I replied. "I need presence." "I can do that." I believed him. The next morning, I woke before he did. Light filtered through the curtains, catching on his face in a way that felt almost unfair. I watched his chest rise and fall, steady and unguarded, and felt something settle, not certainty, not forever, but readiness. When he stirred, he smiled sleepily. "You're staring." "Just thinking," I said. "Good thoughts. Honest ones." We made coffee. We moved through the morning like people who weren't trying to win or recover, just live. And as he left later, kissing my cheek in a way that felt easy and earned, I realized the fear that once defined us had lost its grip. Not because it disappeared, but because we no longer let it lead. That afternoon, alone again, I stood by the window and let that truth land gently. Whatever came next would ask things of us: time, effort, courage. But it wouldn't demand we become smaller to make it work. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a risk. It felt like a conversation still unfolding. It wasn't some big moment that sealed it. No dramatic confession, no cinematic timing. It happened on a random Thursday when my sink started leaking and Noah showed up after work with a toolbox he barely knew how to use. We crouched on the kitchen floor, sleeves rolled up, water dripping into a bowl between us. He laughed at himself more than once. I handed him towels. At some point, we just sat there, backs against the cabinets, listening to the apartment settle. "This is very unromantic," he said. I smiled. "I know. I kind of love it." That was when it hit me, not like a spark, but like weight settling exactly where it belonged. This wasn't about recovering something we lost. It was about building something that could hold us both without asking either of us to shrink. Later that night, we talked about the things we hadn't dared to say yet. Not the heavy stuff we'd already unpacked, but the practical truths. What commitment looked like now. What space we still needed. What would happen when one of us inevitably faltered. "I don't want to disappear when things get hard," he said, "even if I don't know the right words." "Then stay," I replied, "even when you're quiet." He nodded, serious. "Okay." There was no kiss to punctuate it. No grand gesture. Just a shared understanding that this whatever it was being chosen in real time. Weeks turned into months. Friends noticed before we said anything. Someone asked when we were official, and we laughed, then realized we didn't actually care about the label as much as the practice of showing up. We argued sometimes. We recalibrated. We learned when to step forward and when to give space. The difference was this: no one threatened to leave. One evening, as summer started to thin into something quieter, we sat on my fire escape watching the sky dim. Noah leaned his shoulder into mine. "Easy, familiar." "You almost didn't answer me," he said. "I know. I'm glad you did." I thought about the version of myself who had loved him before, open, unguarded, and afraid. I felt a tenderness for that man now instead of embarrassment. "Me too," I said. After he went home, I stayed outside a little longer. The city breathed around me. Cars passed. Windows glowed. Life went on, unbothered by how much had shifted inside my chest. I realized then that forgetting someone doesn't always mean erasing them. Sometimes it means forgiving the past enough to let the present speak. Noah hadn't come back to reclaim what we were. He'd come back when we were finally capable of choosing each other without losing ourselves. And as I closed the window and turned out the lights, that truth didn't feel fragile. It felt steady.